Officer Mark stood at the front counter of the police station and tried to breathe like he had been trained to do. The station felt too bright and too loud, even though the voices around him sounded far away. In his hand, he held a small photo on his phone, and he looked at it again and again. The photo showed his son Leo smiling with 2 front teeth missing, as if the world could never hurt him. But the world had hurt him today, because Leo had been missing for hours, and no one knew where he was. Mark had already run through every detail in his mind, like a loop he could not turn off. Leo had been at the small park near the river with Mark's sister Nina. Nina had turned her head for a moment to answer a call, and when she looked back, Leo was gone. She had searched the swings, the slide, the bench, and the path by the trees, but Leo did not answer. She had called Mark with a shaking voice and said she was sorry, again and again. Mark did not yell at her because he could not waste energy on anger, and he also knew Nina loved Leo. He had rushed to the park and joined the search, and he had called for Leo until his throat burned. Then he had come to the station to coordinate the teams, because he was an officer and he knew how fast time could turn against a family. 2 search groups were already out, moving through the trails and along the riverbank. Another group was checking nearby streets, asking shop owners, neighbors, and anyone who had been outside. A desk officer named Paul brought Mark a bottle of water and told him to drink, but Mark could not swallow easily. Mark thanked him anyway, because his voice still worked, and that felt like the only thing he could control. A few officers avoided Mark's eyes because they did not know what to say, and they did not want to say the wrong thing. One officer tried to offer comfort by saying kids sometimes wandered and came back, but Mark heard the fear behind the words. Mark looked at the clock and forced himself to stay focused, because panic did not help anyone find a child. Outside, the sky was turning the color of dusty gold, and the day was slipping away. Mark kept thinking about the cold coming later, and about the river near the park, and about how quiet a child could be if he was scared. He pictured Leo crouched behind bushes, listening to distant voices, too nervous to answer because he thought he was in trouble. That thought made Mark's chest tighten, and he pressed his thumb into his palm to keep himself steady. He reminded himself that Leo was smart and that Leo knew the rules, but fear could still trap a child in silence. Mark's phone buzzed with a message from Nina, and he saw the words, "Still searching, still no sign," and his stomach dropped. The front doors opened again, and Mark expected another worried parent or another tip that led nowhere. Instead, a small girl walked in with a dog at her side, and the sight was so unexpected that Mark blinked twice. The girl was about 9 years old, small and neat, with dark hair tied back and a serious face. She held an old leash in one hand like she had held it 1,000 times before. The dog was medium-sized and brown, with a short coat and calm eyes that looked like they noticed everything. The dog stepped lightly, not pulling, not dragging behind, just moving as if he belonged there. The girl looked around the station once, then she looked straight at Mark like she already knew who he was. "My dog can find your son," the girl said. Her voice was quiet, but it landed in the room like a bell, and several people turned at once. One officer near the desk let out a small laugh, not mean, but unsure, like a person trying to protect themselves from hope. Another officer raised his eyebrows and glanced at Mark to see how he would respond. Mark felt something sharp inside him, a mix of disbelief and a sudden pull toward any chance that was not empty. He took a step forward and lowered himself to one knee so he would not tower over her. He knew that frightened kids reacted badly to big adults, and he did not want to scare her away. "What is your name?" Mark asked. "Mia," she said. "And this is Bruno," Mia added, and she touched the dog's head gently. Bruno sat down without being told, his tail resting still on the floor, his posture steady. Mark noticed that Bruno did not look nervous in the station, even with strangers and noise and bright lights. That calmness made Mark's mind pause for the first time in hours. Mia's eyes stayed on Mark's face like she was waiting for him to understand something important. Mark tried to speak carefully, because he did not want to crush her, but he also could not waste time on a child's fantasy. "That is very kind, Mia," he said. "We have teams searching already, and we are doing everything we can," Mark said. Mia nodded once as if she had expected that answer. Then she held her chin up and said, "Bruno does not need a team, he just needs a smell," she said. A few officers smiled politely, and one whispered something to another, but Paul did not smile. Paul watched Bruno's ears, his eyes, and his stillness, like he was reading a report written in body language. Mark took a slow breath and asked, "How do you know about my son?" he said. Mia pointed to Mark's phone in his hand, and Mark realized he had been holding the photo where anyone could see it. Mia said, "I saw his face, and I heard your name," she said. Mark looked around and noticed that someone at the front had been speaking about Officer Mark's son, and Mia must have heard. Mark's cheeks warmed with a strange embarrassment, like the whole station had become a stage for his worst day. He looked back at Mia and tried to keep his voice gentle. "Where are your parents?" he asked. Mia said, "My grandma is outside in the car. She said I could come in if I did not run," she said. Mark stood up and rubbed his forehead. He wanted to say no, because he had seen false hope damage people before, and he did not want another wound. But he also felt how time was slipping away, and he was running out of doors to knock on. He asked Mia, "What makes you think Bruno can do that?" he said. Mia did not flinch. She said, "He found my neighbor when he fell near the old field," she said. "He hears people breathing even when they are quiet," she said. Some officers looked doubtful again, but Mark could see Mia believed every word, and she was not acting or showing off. Bruno looked up at Mark, and then looked toward the door, as if he wanted to begin. Paul stepped closer and lowered his voice so only Mark could hear. "It may be worth trying," Paul said. Mark looked at Paul, surprised, because Paul was usually strict about procedures. Paul added, "We are already searching for hours, and this will not slow the teams down, it will just add one more option," he said. Mark felt his heart beat harder, because hearing a practical reason made the idea feel less foolish. He looked down at Mia again and said, "If we do this, you stay close to me the whole time," he said. Mia nodded quickly like she had been waiting for permission, not praise. Mark knelt again and held out his phone with Leo's photo. He turned the phone so the back of it was near Bruno's nose and said, "This is Leo," he said. Bruno sniffed once, then twice, then he lifted his head and looked toward the exit. His body shifted forward, not wild, not frantic, just certain. Mia tightened her grip on the leash, but Bruno did not pull her hard, he guided her like he knew the way already. Mark felt a chill run up his arms, and he did not know if it was fear or hope or both. A few officers moved to follow, and Paul grabbed a flashlight and a radio. Mark spoke quickly to the desk officer to keep the main search teams moving, then he stepped toward the door with Mia beside him. Outside, the air smelled like trees and road dust, and the evening light made the parking lot look flat and pale. Mia's grandmother watched from the car with worried eyes, but Mia waved once as if everything was normal. Bruno walked toward the direction of the river road, and Mark walked beside them, matching his pace to theirs. Mark told himself not to believe too much, but his feet moved faster anyway, because his heart could not help it. Behind them, Paul spoke into the radio to update the station, and his voice sounded steady, but Mark could hear the edge of surprise. As they reached the start of the trail near the park, Bruno stopped for one moment and sniffed the air like he was reading a map written in scent. Then Bruno stepped forward again, and this time he did not hesitate at all. Officer Mark followed Bruno along the narrow path as the trees closed in around them. The sounds of the town faded, replaced by rustling leaves and distant birds settling for the evening. Mia walked steadily beside Mark, holding the leash with both hands like it was something precious. Bruno moved with calm purpose, nose low, tail steady, never stopping for long. Paul stayed a few steps behind, speaking quietly into the radio to update the station. He told them the direction, the path, and the strange but hopeful lead they were following. The response on the radio was careful and neutral, but Paul could hear interest growing. Mark focused on putting one foot in front of the other because thinking too far ahead hurt too much. The path they followed was not part of the main search plan. It curved away from the open park and led toward a cluster of old trees near the river bend. Mark remembered suggesting this area earlier, but the team had decided it was unlikely. Seeing Bruno choose it now made Mark's chest tighten with mixed feelings. Mia stayed quiet, only watching Bruno and adjusting her steps when the ground dipped. She looked like a child who trusted her companion completely. Mark noticed how she never pulled the leash or spoke commands. Bruno seemed to know what to do without words. The light filtered through the leaves in long thin lines. Mark glanced at his watch and felt the pressure of time pressing harder. He imagined Leo feeling cold or tired or scared, and his pace quickened. Paul gently told him to slow down because Bruno needed to lead. After several minutes, Bruno stopped near a patch of tall grass. He sniffed the ground carefully, then shifted slightly to the left. Mia followed his movement without question. Mark felt his heart jump as hope rose and fear followed right behind it. Bruno continued along the edge of the grass, heading toward a slope that led down to the river. Mark remembered warning Leo never to go near the water alone. That memory felt sharp and heavy in his mind. He told himself that warnings were not walls and children did not always listen. Paul checked the ground for signs of movement. He saw small broken stems and disturbed dirt. He nodded to Mark without saying anything. That nod felt louder than words. As they moved closer to the river, the air grew cooler. The sound of water flowing became clearer. Mark called Leo's name softly, careful not to scare him if he was nearby. His voice trembled despite his effort to keep it steady. Mia glanced up at Mark and then back to Bruno. She did not tell Mark to stop or stay quiet. She trusted Bruno to guide them. That trust felt strong and strange to Mark. Bruno slowed near a fallen tree lying across the path. He circled it once, sniffing deeply. Then he barked once, sharp and clear. Mark's heart felt like it might burst from his chest. Paul raised his hand to signal caution. Mark nodded but could not stop himself from stepping forward. Behind the fallen tree, the ground dipped slightly. Shadows gathered there as the light faded. Bruno tugged the leash gently and moved around the tree. Mia followed and Mark followed right behind her. Mark's breath caught in his throat. He felt like the next second would change everything. Behind the tree, Mark saw a small shape curled near the roots. For one terrible moment, fear froze him. Then the shape moved. A small voice whispered a single word. "Dad," Leo said. Mark dropped to his knees without thinking. He pulled Leo into his arms and held him tightly. Leo felt cold but alive and real. Tears blurred Mark's vision as relief flooded through him. Paul stepped closer and spoke softly into the radio. He told the station that Leo had been found safe. His voice shook despite his effort to sound calm. The radio crackled with responses filled with surprise and relief. Leo clung to Mark and did not let go. Mark kept telling him he was safe now. Leo nodded but stayed quiet, still shaken. Mia stood nearby, watching silently. Bruno sat down beside Leo and wagged his tail slowly. Leo reached out and touched Bruno's head. Bruno stayed still like he understood the moment. Mark looked at Mia with disbelief and gratitude mixed together. They waited a few minutes before moving. Paul checked Leo for injuries and wrapped a jacket around his shoulders. Leo said he had hidden because he thought he would be in trouble. Mark felt a deep ache in his chest hearing that. Mark lifted Leo carefully and held him close. He thanked Mia with a voice thick from emotion. Mia nodded like she had expected this outcome all along. She knelt and hugged Bruno around the neck. The walk back felt shorter even though the path was the same. Mark noticed the trees and sounds again like the world had color now. Leo rested his head on Mark's shoulder and slowly relaxed. Paul walked ahead to guide them back to the main area. When they reached the open park, several officers were waiting. Some looked stunned and others smiled openly. One officer wiped his eyes and turned away. No one laughed now. An ambulance checked Leo and confirmed he was fine. Nina rushed forward and hugged both Mark and Leo tightly. She cried and apologized and thanked everyone at the same time. Mark held her shoulder and told her it was over now. Mia's grandmother approached with careful steps. She looked at Mia and then at Mark. Mark thanked her for letting Mia help. She smiled softly and said Mia always trusted Bruno. As the group returned to the station, word had already spread. Officers whispered and glanced at Bruno with new respect. Mark walked beside Mia and Leo, still feeling unreal. He knew this story would be remembered for a long time. Inside the station, the mood had completely changed. Phones still rang, but the tension was gone. Smiles appeared where worry had been before. Mark knelt in front of Mia once more. He thanked her again and tried to find the right words. Mia only said that Bruno liked helping people. Bruno wagged his tail like he agreed. Mark knew this moment would stay with him forever. The hours after Leo was found passed in a strange calm that felt almost unreal. Officer Mark sat in a quiet room at the station with Leo wrapped in a blanket beside him. Leo held a warm cup with both hands and stared at the wall while his breathing slowly evened out. Mark stayed close and did not let go of his son's shoulder for even a moment. Doctors confirmed that Leo was healthy and only tired and shaken. Those words felt like a weight lifting from Mark's chest. He thanked them again and again until one doctor gently told him to rest. Mark nodded, but knew sleep would not come easily tonight. Outside the room, officers spoke in low voices about what had happened. Some replayed the moment Bruno barked near the fallen tree. Others talked about how calm Mia had been the entire time. A few admitted they had doubted her and felt ashamed of that now. Paul stood near the door and watched Mark and Leo quietly. He had worked many cases in his career, but this one stayed with him. He thought about how close they had been to missing the path Bruno chose. That thought made him shiver. Mia sat on a bench in the hallway with her grandmother beside her. Bruno rested at her feet like nothing unusual had happened. Mia stroked his fur slowly and smiled whenever someone looked at him with wonder. She did not seem interested in attention or praise. An officer approached and asked Mia a few gentle questions. Mia answered calmly and honestly. She said Bruno learned by being with people and paying attention. She said he liked helping because it made him happy. Mark stepped out of the room holding Leo's hand. The hallway went quiet as people noticed them. Mark looked tired but lighter than before. Leo leaned into his side like he belonged there forever. Mark walked over to Mia and knelt in front of her. He looked at her seriously and thanked her again. He told her she had done something very important. Mia nodded and said she was glad Leo was safe. Bruno stood and placed his head gently against Mark's leg. Mark rested his hand on Bruno's head and felt warmth spread through him. He had trusted many tools in his career, but never a moment like this. He wondered how many other chances were missed by ignoring quiet voices. Later that evening, news spread through the town. Neighbors talked about the lost boy and the dog who found him. People shared the story with disbelief and relief. Some came to the station just to see Bruno. Mark took Leo home once everything was finished. The house felt different when they stepped inside. Every corner reminded Mark of how close he had come to loss. He carried Leo to bed and stayed until his breathing slowed into sleep. Mark sat in the living room alone and stared at the dark window. He replayed the day from beginning to end. He thought about the park and the phone call and the fear. Then he thought about the small girl who walked into the station without hesitation. He realized that strength did not always come from training or rank. Sometimes it came from trust and calm belief. That thought stayed with him as the night deepened. He promised himself he would remember it. The next morning the station felt busy again, but something had changed. Officers greeted Mark with quiet smiles. Some patted his shoulder or nodded respectfully. They did not need words to understand. Mia and her grandmother returned later that day. They had been asked to come so a report could be completed. Mia wore the same calm expression as before. Bruno walked beside her like a steady shadow. Mark met them at the front desk. He had prepared a small token of thanks. It was not official, but it came from the heart. He handed Mia a simple certificate with her name on it. Mia looked at it with curiosity rather than excitement. She thanked Mark politely and folded it carefully. Her grandmother smiled with pride but said little. Bruno wagged his tail as if he understood the mood. Paul joined them and spoke about training programs and future ideas. He suggested that dogs like Bruno could help in searches. Mark listened closely and agreed. A seed had been planted by one unexpected moment. Other officers gathered nearby and listened. Some shared their own stories of missed chances. Others spoke about learning to listen better. The conversation felt honest and needed. Mia did not speak much during this time. She simply stayed close to Bruno and watched the adults talk. She seemed older than her years in quiet ways. Mark wondered what kind of person she would become. Before leaving, Mia looked at Mark and Leo one more time. Leo smiled shyly and waved. Mia waved back and said goodbye. Bruno barked softly like a farewell. After they left, the station returned to its normal rhythm. But Mark knew something important had shifted inside him. He felt more patient and more aware. He listened more carefully than before. Days passed, and the story continued to spread. People spoke about hope and chance and trust. Some talked about how help could come from unexpected places. The town felt closer because of it. Mark returned to the park one afternoon alone. He stood near the path Bruno had chosen. He looked at the fallen tree and the quiet ground. He whispered a thank you into the air. He knew not every story ended like this one. That truth stayed heavy, but it did not erase the light. This time they had been lucky. And luck had come on 4 small feet and a calm leash. The weeks after the incident moved forward, but the memory stayed strong in the town. People still talked about the evening when a quiet girl and her dog changed everything. Officer Mark returned fully to his duties, but his approach to work felt different now. He listened longer and spoke softer and noticed details he once overlooked. Leo slowly returned to his normal routine. He went back to school and played with friends and laughed again. But sometimes he held Mark's hand a little tighter in crowded places. Mark never pulled away and never rushed him. Nina visited often and stayed close to Leo. She still carried guilt, but Mark reminded her that fear could happen to anyone. They talked more openly as a family. That honesty brought them closer than before. At the station, a small board appeared near the entrance. It held photos of community helpers and moments of hope. Someone placed a photo of Bruno there with permission. Under it was written a simple message of thanks. Mia did not come to the station often after that. She returned to her quiet life with school and walks with Bruno. But when she did appear, people greeted her warmly. She accepted smiles without changing who she was. Bruno became well known in the area. Children waved at him, and adults nodded respectfully. He remained calm and unchanged by attention. Mia said he only cared about walks and helping when needed. One afternoon Mark saw Mia and Bruno at the park. He was there with Leo, who had asked to visit again. Mark felt nervous at first but trusted the moment. He knew fear should not decide their future. Leo spotted Bruno and smiled widely. He walked closer slowly and knelt beside him. Bruno leaned in gently and allowed Leo to pet him. That small moment felt like healing. Mark spoke with Mia's grandmother while watching the children. They talked about simple things like school and weather. But underneath the words was shared understanding. They both knew life could turn suddenly. Mark realized that day had taught him more than any training. It taught him that help did not always come in uniform. Sometimes it came quietly without confidence or demand. And sometimes it walked on 4 legs. The department later introduced a small community program. It focused on listening to residents and trusting instincts. Mark helped guide the effort with care. He wanted others to learn what he had learned. Paul supported the idea strongly. He spoke about the importance of open thinking. Other officers agreed and shared ideas. Change came slowly, but it came. Leo grew more confident with time. He talked about the woods without fear. He even told friends about Bruno proudly. Mark listened and smiled. At night Mark sometimes reflected alone. He thought about how close loss had been. He also thought about gratitude and responsibility. Those thoughts shaped him quietly. The town settled back into normal life. But kindness felt easier to notice now. Neighbors checked on each other more often. Small connections felt stronger. Mia continued to walk Bruno each morning. They followed familiar paths with steady steps. Nothing about them looked heroic. But many knew what they had done. One evening Mark saw the sunset near the river again. He stood where the path began and breathed deeply. He felt peace instead of fear this time. He knew not all stories ended well, but this one mattered. He returned home and hugged Leo tightly. Leo hugged back without question. The house felt warm and full. That was enough. And so the story stayed with them all. Not as something loud or dramatic, but as a reminder that listening mattered. And that sometimes the smallest voice carried the biggest truth.